Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be doing a live demonstration of our RightRev platform today. I appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy schedules to come and join me as we walk through what RightRev can do for you. To start, I'm going to go through a couple of slides. I just want to give a brief background of RightRev and kind of how we came to be. So RightRev was created by our CEO and founder, Jagan Reddy, who's kind of been known as a godfather of revenue because he's been in the world of revenue recognition and automation for about 25 years now. He actually had created a previous product and ended up selling that product about 10 years ago. And he took some time away from the revenue world and decided once ASC 606 came out that he felt like there was a new need and that he wanted to create a new product to solution for that need. And so that's where RightRev came to be. We are built on the idea of solutioning, like I mentioned, for ASC 606 as well as IFRS 15. With that, just a brief introduction to myself. My name is Andrew Trumpeter. I'm our solutions consultant here at RightRev. I've been with the company since August of last year. Prior to that, though, I did spend 10 years as a revenue accountant. So with that, I've kind of seen the world of revenue accounting and all of the different options out there for revenue recognition. And that was really one of the reasons I wanted to join the RightRev team. I think it's an area where there hasn't been a lot of automation done in the past. And so having a solution, a point solution for revenue recognition really interested me. And I'm really passionate about what we can do for the customer. With some of that functionality, obviously revenue recognition is at the core of what we're doing. We're trying to automate your revenue recognition based on whatever revenue trigger you might have, whether that be bookings, billings, some sort of event that's taking place. We also layer in contract modifications. So that's one area that we really strive to improve your performance is we can take existing revenue contracts and update those for amendments that have taken place in the customer lifecycle. We also support the idea of SSP policies, both residual and standard SSP. We have a variety of methods that we allow you to input those policies into RightRev and how to maintain those over time. We'll get into that as we jump into the demo here shortly. And then one of our other main items that we like to harp on is our revenue reporting. We have a strong analytics engine where we actually use a partner, a BI engine, to give you the full capabilities to report on revenue in whatever manner you may require. We offer over 300 different revenue metrics that you can kind of layer in a variety of ways on top of the standard reporting that we provide to really tailor your reporting to your company needs. To the right, we highlight kind of the flow of data into RightRev and how that works. We consider ourselves to be system agnostic, both upstream and downstream to your ERP. What I mean by that is we are built with strong API connections in place and API connectors. And so utilizing those connections and API calls, we're able to work with any upstream platform to pull in your orders, your quotes, your billings, whatever information you need to pull into RightRev, we can get it through those APIs. And then on the back end, as far as how we interact with your ERP, we would be processing journal entries and posting those again through those API calls directly to those ERP engines. Just some additional features that we solve for. Some of this is repeating on those advanced revenue concepts, but RightRev was built with the idea of being a point solution for all things revenue recognition, whether that be some simple recognition concepts to the most complex. We like to say we can solution for basically any need that you may have from a revenue standpoint. With that, I just want to get into what we're going to take a look at today. So to start, we're going to jump into our Revenue Desk 360, which is essentially our home screen. From there, we're going to take a look at what these revenue contracts that I've spoken about look like. We're going to see some of the metrics associated there. We'll look at the line items themselves, what kind of information we house in those line items, and where those rules live. We'll additionally take a look at how an amendment processes through the system. From there, we will show how we actually post revenue recognition via these journal entries. It is a batch process that has to be run per legal entity, and so we'll take a look at how that actually flows in the system. And then lastly, as far as that first section, we'll see how our period close process works Again, we want to be your revenue subledger, and with that, we need to be able to ensure that prior periods are locked so that we can open future periods and report accordingly on what's been done in the past. On top of all of that, we'll then jump into the configuration itself. So we'll look at how we do some grouping rules with identifying those customer contracts. We'll look at all of our specific revenue recognition rules that we can set up. We support the idea, again, of user-defined events, which really allows us to specify an infinite number of ways to trigger revenue recognition. So we can use whatever you need upstream to trigger revenue recognition to take place on the revenue contract. And then as far as additional configuration items, the last one we'll touch on is SSP policies and how we solution for that. At the end of the configuration, we'll jump into the reporting capabilities of RightRev and just talk about some of those things a little bit further as far as what we can offer. And then lastly, to end our webinar today, we'll do a Q&A. And with that, you'll notice in your GoToMeeting that there is a questions section. If along the way you have questions, please input those there. And at the Q&A portion of things, I'll come back into those questions and try and answer everything we can today. All right, with that, let's get started. So I am jumping into the RightRev platform now. As I mentioned, I'm starting on our Revenue Desk 360. This is essentially our homepage. This acts as our contract depository, so to speak. So every revenue contract that we create is going to be housed here. We have a variety of different ways that you can kind of search that detail, but then all of that is also available through a search bar here at the top, where you can search by contract number, maybe your order, your invoice, whatever customer name you're looking for, that kind of thing. You can search here, and it will pull all recent contracts associated. To start, I'm going to click into Revenue Contract 432, and we'll walk through what this is. So we have this unique contract number here, RC432. This is a system-generated number. This allows us to give, again, a unique identifier to all of our revenue contracts, so you never have to worry about duplication there. From the top screen here, we're pulling in the customer name, the currency. We do support multi-currency, but this is going to pull what currency this specific contract is in, as well as which legal entity it's referring to. And lastly, the period that it's created. From there, we also are tracking all of your ASC 606 steps. So if you're familiar with the 5-step process, we have our identify contract, identify your performance obligations or POBs, calculate that transaction price, allocate that price, and then finally recognize revenue. What you'll notice is oftentimes when you're viewing a revenue contract in RightRev, we're jumping from this identify contract position all the way to allocate transaction price. And the reason for that is we're automating the steps in between. So we have specific rules in place to determine those performance obligations and how that kind of flows naturally into the revenue contract. On the right-hand side of our revenue contract, we house just some standard metrics. These are some core metrics that we like to refer to. So the first and foremost is the contract value. This is going to tie to the total sales price of the order or contract that we've ingested from upstream. So we are getting that information from our revenue contract lines, which I'll talk about here in a minute, but that is just going to give us a holistic view of what our contract value looks like to date. We then are pulling in how much has actually been billed to date for all of those items. We're tracking how much revenue has actually been recognized to this point in time. And then our last two that we're housing here is revenue planned and revenue unplanned. So these might be foreign concepts to some of you. Revenue planned is essentially that we have satisfied that revenue trigger. So maybe the revenue trigger was the bookings itself. So once that trigger has taken place, we've released the revenue to the revenue waterfall to begin the recognition process. So the contra to that is revenue unplanned. What that means is whatever the triggering event is, it has not yet been satisfied. Maybe we're waiting on invoicing to take place. Maybe we're talking about a user-defined event where it's like percentage of completion, and we just haven't actually completed that performance obligation. So those items are both being tracked, but holistically, that is going to give us our total contract position. As far as the actual contract position and where we're tracking that, we are tracking whether you're in that contract liability or contract asset position right here in the metrics. So in this specific case, we're just taking that amount that's been billed, we're subtracting what's been recognized. It's giving us a contract liability or a deferred revenue position for this individual contract. As I kind of make my way down the right-hand side of our revenue contract, we're tracking some more information that might be valuable. We're tracking previous quarter, current, and next quarter revenue. So this is all based on revenue that has been planned or recognized. As we continue to satisfy unplanned requirements and unplanned triggers, we would release more revenue into these buckets potentially. We are additionally tracking your allocations, or what we call your carves. So in this specific contract, we have an SSP policy in place. We have some allocations that then need to take place because of some discounting that was factored in. And this is giving us a holistic view of what those allocations look like across the entirety of the contract. Jumping forward, I'm going to skip the product summary for a moment. We'll come back to that here in a second. I'm going to start on revenue contract lines. So this revenue contract line is going to be a one-to-one relationship with your order upstream. So every single order item that we are pulling forward, we are going to create a new revenue contract line in RightRev. With that, we are assigning specific revenue treatment for all of those lines. We're tracking a number of revenue metrics on all of these items. So some of the calculations here are done within RightRev. Some of this is information we are ingesting from upstream. So like total billed amount, we're obviously pulling that in from your upstream platform, letting us know how much has been invoiced for each item. But things like SSP price, the cumulative carves, cumulative net revenue, we're calculating all of that in our revenue engine to then give you the metrics for reporting. Each of these items that are presented here has a specific revenue trigger associated, and we'll touch on that here shortly on how these are actually created, but it has a specific trigger and a specific distribution method on how these recognition events actually take place. This first item was set to trigger upon bookings, and it's going to prorate based on days in a calendar period. So what that means is we're going to recognize, according to these revenue start and end dates, the number of days each month in this term are going to get a specific revenue amount associated. Whereas this amount that's based on billings, whenever we bill, we're going to recognize right as that's being billed. Just to highlight some of the other items that are being shown in this specific example, just to show how we can solution for a variety of items. So our first product is a ratable SaaS solution, pretty straightforward. We're going to start recognition on bookings over that term of the agreement. The second item, however, is a usage or consumption item. So the way that RightRev handles that, if we're talking about usage being associated to billings, we wouldn't have an order quantity and order list price, sales price a lot of times for these items. So we would just ingest from your upstream system a usage item that we can then assign invoicing and revenue recognition to as it occurs. So in this specific case, we have billed $2,000 here in the month of April, and because we've done that billing, we're now releasing $2,000 worth of revenue to your GL as well. This will allow us to continue to update over time that usage and consumption, and this is just one of the many ways we can solution for that specific type of revenue. We also support the idea of kind of a contract drawdown, where maybe you have a prepaid amount that's being consumed over time. With that, we would set up specific events to pull in your usage data that's been rated and release revenue accordingly. The other items being presented here, we have a T&M professional services item. So this is going to be something that's recognized upon billings, so upon the hours that have been worked. We have a fixed fee professional services item. In this case, I have it set up to be a percentage of completion item. So in this one, if I scroll to the right, you can see that we've set this up as a user-defined event. That, in this case, is a percentage complete cumulative process. So what that means is we're going to be fed information saying that this specific item is such and such percent complete, and then RightRev is going to calculate the revenue that needs to be released in this period accordingly. The reason cumulative comes into play is that if we're talking percentage complete, it's often a requirement that customers are only tracking their current percent complete. They're not tracking kind of that change month over month. So here in April, if we're 25% complete, we're going to recognize that 25%. But next month, if we're 30% complete, we're not going to recognize an additional 30%, obviously. By this being listed as cumulative, we're actually only going to be recognizing the net 5% change. So that is what that cumulative distinction means. The last items that I've added for today's demonstration are just a license item that is being recognized immediately, and a support and maintenance item that's associated to that, which is recognizing ratably. Jumping back into our revenue contract, I'm going to come up to this product summary now. So the important distinction between the revenue contract line section and this product summary is that our product summary is always going to summarize every single type of product that we have and all of the information associated. The revenue contract lines that we just looked at, anytime we do an amendment or anytime there might be duplicate products on the same order, you're going to see an individual item for each of those products. Here, you're going to see a summarized view where we can kind of roll all of that information into one area and just give you a different kind of flavor for how to view that information, additionally giving us different metrics that we can report on in our analytics. The next thing, as we kind of scroll down our revenue contract, is the revenue contract journals. So within this section, we're actually, any revenue that has been planned or scheduled is going to actually have a revenue journal entry created to that point. These can be updated over time as changes kind of flow as we continue to meet those revenue triggers. But this is going to show us exactly what revenue account and item is being released. If we have recognized it, in this case, I've actually already run the recognition for April, and our status you can see is updated to transferred. Whereas if I look at future transactions, we can see these are yet to transfer and we have not actually recognized them at any point. But I can see transactions all the way out to March 2025 because of our ratable items that have been triggered. With that kind of brings up the idea of a revenue waterfall and what that looks like. So speaking of things being triggered and how that kind of looks in the platform, whenever we have that triggering event take place, we're releasing revenue to the revenue waterfall for recognition. So you can see in this first item, we're talking about our support and maintenance. This is going to be recognized ratably over the term that we've given, but we're also tracking the allocations that have taken place. So there is a carve out also being handled as part of the SSP allocation process, and we're rolling that in as part of the planned amount for this specific product. Additionally, I'm seeing that we've also done recognition here in April, so I can see what's been planned versus what's been recognized. And I have that again for every single product on our revenue contract that has been planned. All right, so this first example was just kind of a first contract, what that could look like. Now I want to layer in an amendment and see what that does. So coming back to our revenue contract depository here, our revenue desk 360, I'm going to open this additional revenue contract, and we can see everything was the same as far as the initial agreement. So I have our initial 6 items that we saw previously, but I've now layered in an amendment, and we've added 3 more line items to this contract. So we're going to see how the change actually impacts the rest of this revenue contract. First off, anytime we have a change, we are tracking the revenue contract version. We have reporting available to define what's changed period to period and what's changed version to version. We also are tracking the most recent modification period on all of our revenue contracts for reporting purposes as well. And then you can see that our revenue contract value increased. We've have additional amounts sitting in revenue planned and revenue unplanned. And if I go back into these revenue contract lines one more time, you can see I added additional items that were already on the original agreement. So in this case, we've added a user for the SaaS product, and we've added more T&M hours as well as another fixed fee bucket. So as you can see, that didn't roll up into the existing products from the previous agreement. It is adding a new line item for each of those amended items, each with their own revenue recognition rules and revenue recognition periods. So in this case, this first item was a SaaS item. It is recognizing now starting in May, but it's co-terming to the end of the agreement. So we're actually only going to be seeing a revenue waterfall for 11 months on this item. Again, to highlight the product summary though, we are rolling up those products into the 6 products that we had from our original agreement. So we can see this SaaS product increased in value because we have that amendment that was processed along with these fixed fee and T&M items as well. So again, just different ways to view information. It allows us to give you a better reporting process on the back end. Other items before we kind of move forward. Back on the revenue contract lines, some of the functionality that we have available is to click into the individual order item itself. From there, we can actually see invoicing, so we can see the billings that have taken place, when those took place, how much, what quantity, such and such information. You're able to kind of provide through those API integrations what you want us to ingest there. We also have the full revenue schedule for this specific item. This is going to track all of the revenue carves that are taking place on each item. We're going to get those initial entries of actually releasing those to our waterfall, and then we have the recognition events that are taking place over time. So in this case, we recognized 100% of this line item back in April. In addition to all of that, we also track SSP on the line item level. So we are doing allocations based on specific SSP policies in place. This is just one of the many areas you can come to see which SSP policy is actually being applied to each individual line item and what that SSP price is being calculated as, and the allocations that are taking place because of that. That essentially wraps up everything from the revenue contract level that I wanted to talk about today. The next step in the process that I want to highlight, though, is how we actually recognize revenue and what that looks like. As I mentioned previously, the idea of revenue recognition is done through a journal run process. So what that means is I'm going to come in and actually create a batch process to release revenue for this specific period. This is legal entity specific, so you do have to run this process for however many legal entities you have. That being said, you just click create a new batch. The system is going to then start searching the entirety of all of our revenue contracts to determine if there's anything to this point in time that has not been recognized. So it's not just searching the month of April here, it's searching all prior periods as well to see if maybe we added an agreement in April that had revenue that should have started in February, so to speak. So it is going to calculate the net impact of all of those changes. At this point, it's going to give me a summary of what that revenue journal entry looks like. We do, again, have the integration that we can build to your ERP to post these direct to your GL. But when we do that, we typically refer customers and say that we prefer you do these summary versions. The reason for that is we want RightRev to be your revenue subledger, and we want you to be able to do all of your reporting out of RightRev. We don't want there to be a need necessarily for you to report on your GL. Additionally, though, we have the details that make up these entries, but as we talk about larger companies with a lot of transactions, the reason we try to stick to the summarized version is that some ERPs simply can't handle the volume and the number of transactions that we'd be trying to push via journal entry. So we don't want to bog down your ERP system with an automated journal entry that may delay things on that side for your users there. Once you've kind of reviewed things, the actual post process would be clicking this transfer button. So this is what would actually transfer this journal entry from RightRev to your ERP for posting. When we build out that integration, we would then be pulling in a status from your ERP, letting us know whether this is posted or if there was an error. And then there's going to be that unique identifier to always refer entries from your ERP to RightRev. Once that journal entry process has been run, you might have the need to actually close your period. So again, we want to be your revenue subledger, and as part of that, we have to be able to lock previous periods to then move in to the next open period. With that, every single legal entity, again, just like our journal entry batch process, requires a period close process be run. This process will start out by searching for any errors that may exist. So if our upstream system provided us information and we didn't have a revenue rule set up, there might be an error that we need to correct, and we might need to resync that information. We can track that here before we actually close the period for opening of the next. So once that's been reviewed, we can check any revenue that we've placed on hold. Again, we're going to look into anything that we've previously done that might need to be updated for this specific period before we close and move into the next. And then lastly, we just went over the journal run process, but we're going to be flagged one more time as a part of this period close to let us know if there's any revenue contracts that have yet to be recognized for this specific period. So if we ran that process the journal batch process a day ago, but something's changed and we come in to close the period, this is going to let me know that something's changed and we really need to come back and rerun that journal entry process. So once you review all three of these items, we would then come up and click close period. That is going to lock all of your prior period information. We cannot make any more changes at that point, and it's going to open up the next period. In this case, it would open up May. All right. So we have moved through our revenue contract. We've moved through the journal process and the period close process. Let's take a look at the configuration and what that looks like in RightRev. So I'm going to click into revenue policies here on the left-hand tab. And from here, we're going to start with our identifying customer contract. From this specific area, we can determine how we want to group revenue contracts. So we can determine if we are creating a new revenue contract for a customer, or if we're going to be layering an amendment onto an existing revenue contract like we just saw. So there's up to 5 different criteria that you can set to determine how that grouping takes place. This is really up to you as an end user to determine what your company needs. In our demo org today, it's just a very simple by grouping ID is what we're using. But you can make this as complex as you may require. And this would run on all of the new orders that are being sent into RightRev. From there, we're going to define our revenue rules. So this is going to be our actual treatment for revenue recognition purposes for all of our performance obligations. Typically, what we refer customers to is to set these up product by product. And so for every single product in your product book, we want a specific revenue policy in RightRev. So we would name our product. This would be the unique identifier that you have from your upstream process. We would then define what that revenue trigger that we've talked about is. Is it going to be based on billings, bookings? Is it going to be manual in some way where you want to actually take control of when the release takes place? Or are we going to be utilizing that user-defined event process that we've touched on? If we choose user-defined event, we then actually have to select what that event is. Like I mentioned on the fixed fee item, we could do a percentage complete and do that as cumulative, or we can define additional events in the next screen that I'll show you to really give you, again, that kind of infinite way of configuring RightRev to meet your needs. So as long as these events can flow into RightRev from your other systems, we can kick off revenue and trigger revenue from those events. You're then going to choose your distribution method. In this case, you have the option to select point in time, where once that trigger has been satisfied, it's going to recognize immediately at that point in time, or ratable, again, over a specific term that you might have provided to us. And then lastly, if you're choosing ratable, if there's ever a situation where we're fed information from a prior period, let's say we get an order today, but the start date of that order is from a prior period, in this case, maybe we say February 1st. How do we actually handle those prior 2 months of revenue recognition? We have a couple of options as far as configuration on what we will allow. The first and probably most common is a catch-up of revenue in this current period. So we're in April now, revenue started in February, we would catch up 2 months here in April. The other options would be to distribute that 2-month period over the remainder of the term. So if it was an annual agreement, we might distribute that over 10 months as opposed to the 12 that was originally stated. And then the last option, which is probably the least commonly used, is to extend the end date and distribute over a new term. What that means is we would actually say the revenue was triggered today, so instead of using February 1st as our start date, we're going to use today as our start date and process however long that initial period was. We'll process that for this new start date. So our end date would adjust from January 31st to April 23rd in this case. So that's our product by product revenue rule policy builder. We also have this concept called rules builder. This is essentially an override process that allows us to pick and choose specific criteria. So we know that not every scenario is always going to be treated the exact same for every single product. Every single business might have their own kind of unique use cases, whatever that may be. You can define those unique use cases here. So as long as they're happening often enough for you to actually come in and kind of want to automate this, you can build out criteria and say, for every single time we work with customer ABC, so you'd say equal to ABC, we want to treat revenue in this manner. And so you would set specific rules for that specific customer or for that specific product as well. So you can choose up to 5 criteria again to apply those rules. So that is how we set up revenue recognition rules. I mentioned the idea of user-defined events. So this is where we'd actually set up that defined event. You would name the event. We're going to choose how we're going to input that information or how we're going to receive that information into RightRev. Is it going to be an amount that we're going to be given that's going to recognize a formula of some kind? We talked about percentage of completion, so it'd be a percentage. Or is it going to be quantity based, where maybe we've sold 10 items or a quantity of 10 items and we're only fulfilling 2 at this point? And then additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we have the idea of setting each of those up as cumulative or non-cumulative. Moving back into our revenue policies and some of the things we have to offer here, we have, I'm going to skip over holds. It's a relatively simple concept. We have the ability to place revenue on hold. That is essentially what the setup there is. The next item is contract amendments, though. So because we're able to layer in amendments into existing revenue contracts, there's often a need for reporting purposes and for SSP purposes to track that amendment reason and determine the allocation treatment of each one. So in this section, we can add amendment reasons, and this would all be information, again, that we can flow from your upstream process. And we can say every single time we do an add, we're going to flag it upstream as an add. It's going to flow into RightRev as such, and we're going to treat the allocation as prospective. You can always change this to retrospective if necessary. Again, that's up to your company to define the policy treatment there. But this allows us to flag each of those reasons for reporting and really helps as far as the carve-out process that's taking place on our backend engine. And then lastly is the idea of bundle configuration. Initially, I had said that all of our products on our revenue contract is a one-to-one relationship to your order. That's not necessarily true if there is a bundle configuration necessary. And so in this case, you would set up a parent product. You would determine the children products that we want to allocate a portion of that revenue to. So we could say we have a license, maybe it's a term license as our parent product, and we need the PCFs, the ratable portion, to be split to the child. We could say we want to split 20%. We could make that eligible for SSP allocations as well if necessary. Or we could leave this percentage as 0 and strictly allocate based on SSP. So there's a lot of options with how this is set up, but it gives you that ability to kind of configure to your need. Additionally, we have these last 3 items as far as our child relationship. You can set a specific number of months that you want that recognition to take place. You can set up specific deferred and revenue accounts. However, if any of these options are not completed, it's simply going to pull that information from the parent. Moving forward, we're going to jump into our SSP policy configuration. So we support a variety of methods of actually inputting SSP policies for all of your products into RightRev. The first and probably most straightforward is going to be a formula option. With that, we come in and add a new SSP policy. Again, I said we do support residual policies as well, but we're going to add an SSP policy, and we're going to say it's a formula option. So what that means is that we're going to define a specific criteria, a specific formula that's going to determine that SSP price. Maybe it's just that it equals list price, so our formula is just going to be list. We can then set a floor to give us a range of what that SSP price is going to be. I could say 10% floor and ceiling, so that's going to do 10% from our list price as our range of our SSP. And then you can determine your criteria. So if it's product specific, you could add your specific products. Again, determine how your treatment of that sales price is going to be. If it's below that range, what takes place? Is it going to be below? You're going to use that below midpoint. If it's within range, are you going to use that midpoint? Such and so forth, so on and so forth. So that is the first option. The second option is an upload process. So the formula option is going to require you to create a number of SSP policies if you go that route, because you're going to want to create one for each of the criteria that you may have, which is usually product by product. The upload process allows you to create those all in an Excel CSV and do the exact same thing, but in a bulk process. So when I create this SSP policy, it is going to create a batch process for us to then upload a CSV file into RightRev with all of our SSP information across all of the criteria that we require. So it's just another way to do the same sort of thing as our formula, but usually done on a much bigger level. And then the last option is our calculator. And this is by far one of the coolest options that we have. So our SSP calculator will actually take a look at all of your historic data in the platform based on whatever kind of data criteria you set up, and it will determine that SSP price for you. The nice thing here too is that it'll actually give you that bell curve. You'll actually be able to see exactly what transactions are making up that bell curve. And let's say there's maybe an item that you need to exclude because it was kind of a one-off situation. You don't want to include that in your SSP. You have the ability to download all of the data that makes up that calculation, and you can exclude certain items if necessary. So it's really powerful and lets you kind of automate all of that SSP calculations. Just one additional thing that you don't have to do as a revenue accountant. Moving forward, the last thing I wanted to touch on today is our analytics. And so, as I've mentioned throughout the entire presentation, we are built to kind of provide you reporting that you need. And what I mean by that is we are tracking so many revenue metrics throughout our revenue contracts and so much information that we're able to layer that in a number of ways to kind of give you whatever reporting you may require. Now we have our standard reporting where we do revenue waterfalls by contract. We can look at those remaining contract obligations. We have a variety of roll forward reporting for the revenue contracts themselves or even deferred revenue. We can track your contract asset versus liability, so on and so forth. And then we even have some dashboards that we utilize as well. But all of that to say is, as part of our implementation, we also work with you to understand what your reporting needs are so that we can help tailor reporting exactly to what you need. So it's very powerful. We actually use a third-party BI engine to help give us all of this capability to make our analytics so powerful. And then as far as additional reporting items, the last thing I wanted to touch on is the audit logs. So being ASC 606 compliant and IFRS 15 compliant, we need to be able to track the history and the hierarchy of what's happening on all of our policies. So everything we looked at from a revenue policy and SSP policy standpoint, all of those changes and all of the creation of everything that's taking place is tracked within our audit logs here. So it gives us the ability to provide auditors what they may need there. All right. That was everything I wanted to show from the RightRev side. Now let's jump into questions. So our first question, let's see. Actually, do we have questions today? It looks like our first question is, do we have an integration with NetSuite? So as I mentioned early on, our ERP integrations are done through API calls, and we're really only pushing that journal entry information to the GL. So with that, we don't have a native integration with NetSuite or any other ERP, but through our API connections, again, we're system agnostic, and we can connect and automate those postings to a variety of ERPs. So we've worked with the NetSuites, the QuickBooks, the Sages of the world, among many others. The next question I have is, do you have the ability to manage multiple legal entities? I must have kind of touched on this as we went through the process, but yes, we have the ability to handle multiple legal entities. You would set up as many as you require. All of our legal entities will be currency. They will require a currency to be set up as well. So with that, we do support multi-currency. We do support the idea of having as many legal entities as you need for reporting purposes. And again, all that really does from a contract level is it requires us to run journals by legal entity and our close process by legal entity. All right. Is there any, another one I must have answered along the way, is there any audit protection built into RightRev? So as I mentioned just before we kind of came over into the questions here, we do have that audit policy log. So From there, it's going to track any changes that have taken place on those policies. But also within our revenue contracts, we have the ability to process kind of manual transactions. And what I mean by that is we can manually release and defer revenue if things aren't as we maybe saw fit, or we can regroup. So again, we have those contract identification processes. If something grouped that we didn't want to, or something didn't group that we wanted to, we have the ability to manually go in and process those changes. However, every single time a manual action is taken, it requires an audit trail. So it requires comments and commentary for that audit trail so that we can report exactly why these things are being done. All right, I don't actually see any other questions. So with that, I just want to say thank you for everyone joining today. I know everyone's got a busy schedule, so I really, truly appreciate you being a part of this live demonstration. I hope we were able to answer a lot of the questions that you might have had around RightRev. With that being said, if there's something you had further questions on, or if you'd like to see more of RightRev, please go into our website and you can request a live demo there, or feel free to reach out to me directly via email, or I think Alyssa is on this as well, Alyssa Camarillo. You can reach out to either of us and we will get you set up moving forward. Additionally, please follow us on LinkedIn. We're constantly giving updates to the product via LinkedIn and tracking fun things along the way. Just recently, we did some March Madness items as well, just to show all of the fun that revenue has. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.